I think many of you already know this about me, so it may not come as a complete revelation, but I am a big fan of the game of football. I may have mentioned this from time to time. But what you may not know is that I actually came to football fandom rather late. I'm not from a big football family. And this very fact of my late interest may be, when I think about it, why I like it now. You see, other sports were much bigger in my life growing up. I was 5 years old when I first visited Fenway Park. And I've been known to tell long and tedious stories to people who honestly I know do not care. And with characters in them with names like Oil Can Boy and Boomer Scott. And the more pedestrian Jim Rice, of course. And I loved basketball. I remember going to the Boston Garden as a kid, and I mean the real Boston Garden. Right? The one with all the smoke and a century of stale beer on the floor. I remember going there and I remember meeting Bill Fitch and Red Auerbach and Kevin McHale and Robert Parrish and Bob Cousy, John Havlicek. But I also quite vividly remember another fact of my childhood, an indisputable fact, which was that I was singularly incompetent at playing both basketball and baseball. I mean, I was really bad. Okay, not that sort of boo-hoo, I never made varsity thing that sometimes people go into. I mean, I was really bad. I was humiliatingly, painfully, parents and friends embarrassed for me bad at baseball and basketball. My moments actually playing these games stand out as spectacular failings on a field of competition right next to lesser failings, probably only because I cared less, in soccer, tennis, lacrosse, hockey, skiing, skateboarding, and probably a few I have effectively blocked from my mind. Because unlike many arenas in our lives, there is no real way to hide your athletic shortcomings, are there? Or you can't cover them up. They're right there for everyone to see. But I never failed at football. I never failed at playing football. And that's because I never played it. So my incompetence is happily an abstraction, which, let's face it, makes it a little easier to enjoy some of those games on Sunday afternoon. We have gifts, Paul tells us. We have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us. Prophecy in proportion to faith, ministry in ministering, the teacher in teaching, the exhorter in exhortation, the giver in generosity, the leader in diligence, the compassionate in cheerfulness. You know, it's all well and good that Paul goes on and on and on about gifts. And we all like to hear this reading in particular. We use it, or ones like it, probably a couple times a year. If I don't, then Donna will, or Matt, because it is just so affirming, so positive. It is ready-made for the sort of Sunday where we focus on building our community or finding the right path, discerning our call. Right? It's the sort of reading that would have gone well last week, actually, when Matt talked about saying yes when God speaks to us. And it's good for today, too. But there's something missing here. There's the other half of what Paul is saying that we don't always like to dwell on. And that is the fact that if everyone has a gift, and these gifts are all different, then none of us is gifted in every way. If everyone has a gift, and these gifts are all different, none of us is gifted in every way. Yes, Adam, we know that. It's pretty obvious. And it may be obvious enough that you may even wonder why it's worth mentioning this morning. But believe me, it is. After all, many people, including many of us, are so afraid of our own incompetence or the appearance of something less than perfection that we work very hard to create the appearance of being good at everything. We build up a wall or a front to convince ourselves and others of our extreme competence. We construct so formidable an edifice that we miss the lessons, even the joys, certainly the wonder of exploring parts of our lives and our world far away from our obvious gifts, places where we will never, ever be expert. Maybe this is why Paul tells us not to try to appear wiser than we are. And why Philip Toshio Sudo says we must develop a keen sense to realize when imperfection is perfection. I think our resistance comes from our cultural tendency to ignore another piece of advice that Paul gave us this morning. Do not conform to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Do not conform. That should sound familiar. It's an important element of our faith. But the fact is, we so often do conform. We worry about how we are perceived in the various groups we are a part of, at work, in our families, in volunteer groups, at church. And frankly, we worry about the impressions we make to total strangers that we will never, ever, ever see again. Unless we're in the car. And then maybe we should worry a little bit more. And so the competencies that we worry about the most, the gifts we celebrate and strive for, come not from our faith or our hearts, but from what society tells us is important. See, not all gifts are created equal, and we seem to have inverted the order somewhat over the years. I mean, look at Paul's list of gifts. He has a few there, doesn't he? And there are no doubt more that he didn't put down. But we can tell something about what concerned him, what he cared about, and what he believed that Jesus cared about when we see the types of things he listed. Prophecy, ministry, teaching, giving, and compassion. Now, some of you know this. Paul was not a professional prophet or minister. He made tents. He's a tent maker, which was a big job at the time. It wasn't like working for LLB. People actually lived in tents. And he didn't start off with a gift for tent making, did he? There's no gift here about being able to make a lot of money or dress well or have perfect hair or have a lot of friends or take fabulous vacations or be successful at work. There's nothing here about being famous or respected or playing the violin perfectly or throwing the greatest knuckleball, thank God. You know, all those times when someone famous talks about the gift they received that lets them do the things that they do to be successful in this world, that's not what Paul is talking about. Paul tells us that God's gifts are not about measurable goals, about achievements and rewards in this world, but they exist instead in the fuzzier region of how we relate to people, to the divine, to the community, and to ourselves. They are gifts of service, of caring, and connection. In these things, Paul tells us, we should try to strive for perfection. But with all that other stuff, we have some wiggle room. And this is where our spiritual lives sometimes suffer, because we do not open ourselves up to the grace that comes with a good failure. At some point, I don't quite remember when, I gave up playing sports entirely when I realized that I would never be good at them. And I suspect there are things like that in your life too. Places where you stopped trying once it became clear that you would never be great. Maybe it would never be monetized. And that's too bad. Because we should embrace our incompetence more often. Now, I know that some of you are thinking, great, Adam, but there's only so many hours in a day. I have a lot of incompetences, and if I took all that time exploring my ineptitude, I probably wouldn't get anything done. Right? But by pushing ourselves, we can break out of the realm of conformity and enter that of transformation and renewal. We can find joy and enlightenment by embracing our amateur status, by accepting it, not secretly, but proudly and publicly. We don't have to do this with everything. Maybe just one thing. Now, I'm not going to go join one of those baseball teams for middle-aged men. I'm doing that as a service to my potential teammates. And also, I didn't have all that many dreams, really, in that direction for myself. But instead, I'm rediscovering music. And as you are all painfully aware, I am still striving for the lofty heights of mediocrity. But you know, that's okay. That is okay. It still works. Now, you can do this sort of thing too. Every couple of years I talk about this issue, about letting ourselves go a bit, about loosening up and caring less about what people think of us and what we think of ourselves, about being a permanent beginner at something that just makes us happy. If we are able to do this, to take on this kind of spiritual discipline, I believe that those gifts that Paul tells us about, those important gifts, will grow within us. We will take ourselves less seriously, be slower to judge, be more at peace with ourselves, and therefore better equipped to bring peace to others. We will be able to take another major step toward a holier life. So now is the time to make those choices. As we get ready for the less hectic days of summer, it's time to give some thought to what incompetence of ours we might want to embrace this year. What we want to explore and get excited about without worrying about appearing too nerdy or worrying about who may or may not approve. So let's take a moment of silence to think about these things.